Hello, my name is Chris Blask. I am your host again for another episode of the Inevitability Curve, where we take issues, very specific, very general issues, look back at where we've been with these issues in the past, try to figure out where we are today, and with any luck, get some idea of where we may be going in the future. So with me today is a very dear friend, Bill McGee. Bill, how are you?
I'm awesome, Chris. How are you doing?
I love life. Where in the world are you again?
Right now, I'm in a little town called Alpine, Utah, and we're on the verge of a winter storm warning headed our way, and so we're in the throes of transitioning from fall to winter.
Transitioning, and I think that's, as we're talking about in the green room, I think that's going to be sort of our topic. We'll see where it goes, but as everybody knows, so this, in future, we're recording this after the two hurricanes, Helene and Milton, hit Florida in the southeast. Hurricane Milton passed over Mark Twain and Sam Clemens. The solar-powered Starlink-enabled odd vessels I have north of Cape Kennedy at the moment. I'll be leaving in a few days to go deal with those, a little bit of damage, and sail them down to the Keys. And at the same time, we're also, the whole world is sitting here a couple days later saying, did we just catch a 20-story falling stainless steel water tower from space before it hit the ground? Right? SpaceX has done this amazing feat of launching the fifth test flight of their starship development process. And for anybody who's missed this, it's a two-stage thing. Where one stage goes up, is basically like a really long runway for planes. You can think about it that way. It just goes up, and then the other spaceship, the thing that goes up in space, goes wherever those things go. And then this bloody thing came back and landed. I mean, did you see that?
Yeah, I did. It was remarkable. I mean, it landed right on the landing pad, the launch pad.
And with the two little pins on two little rails, like two mechanical chopsticks, perfectly timed with AI and on the ship itself, on the arms. Anyways, we're at that point. So if this seems interesting conversation, it's not just because Bill and I will do that anyways. We're in funny times, right? And again, as we're saying in the agreement, we look back. And maybe the topic today is change and transition. You're a student of ancient history, religious texts, and so forth, where we've been as a human culture. And anybody who looks back that far sees that we've gone through phases. And those phases were typically separated by transitions, which themselves are historically always noticeable. We're there. And it's a bit cliche to say that our entire lives have been into one of these big transitions from the industrial age to the cybernetic age, or where we're going. But right now, right, this, today, this year, last year, the last 3, 4, 5 years, the next 3, 4, 5 years feels particularly cruxy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The last time we had a big transition like this, I think, was in the end of the 19th century, where you had Darwin, and you had changing science, and you had Freud changing psychology, and or even inventing psychology to a large degree. You had literature changing, you had art changing, you had music was in a big transition. All of those things were all kind of happening at the same time. And that seems to happen quite often, right? We didn't just invent the car; several people invented the car at the exact same time, right? And so history tends to kind of lead to these things where everything's in transition, and we're in one of those things right now where we're in a huge social transition, we're in a huge political transition, we're in a huge technological transition. Art is changing dramatically, because what does it mean when art crashes into the digital world? Music, the whole music industry has undergone a dramatic change in terms of how you create it, where you get it, how you monetize it, all of that. So it's this global shift that's happening, and it's creating a lot of tension and a lot of energy, good and bad. at the same time, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it everywhere, right? It's reflected in our daily lives, in the economy, and in our political structures and everything. Religion is undergoing a dramatic shift right now, um, and that's and that's creating a lot of tension because so many of our kind of social norms and the standards by which we've always kind of lived our lives, at least for the last century or so, are undergoing dramatic change and shift. Marriage is probably irrelevant at this point for the most part, and which is a huge dramatic social change. So yeah, it's an understatement to say we're at an inflection point.
Well, and I like the fact that you started with late 1800s, right? So and if you put yourself in the mind of those people at the time, right? Late Victorian era, right? Where so much has changed. We've gone from wooden sailing ships to steam and power and locomotion. Our current obsession with steampunk, right? We put ourselves in the mindset of those people and thinking they've achieved, and then just follow that straight path, that linear future, right?
The first idea that God is dead happened then. And that's what threw everybody off, right? Not that I'm not making a statement on whether God is dead or not, but I'm just saying that was the conclusion. Freud and Darwin and those guys and the religious community, the response from that community was extreme, like today.
Well, and that I guess the point that I'm not quite making here is that standing there at that time, you might have thought you were at this pinnacle, right? And that the future is going to, follow from that in some sort of linear fashion, when really that was all just prelude. The actual turn of the century, 1900, World War I, World War II, the first half of the 20th century, were not, I don't think, predictable in many ways from an 1895 perspective.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of similarities now. We look out at the future from where we are today, and I think quite often people are missing the point, as we sort of did then.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that being able to predict the future is an easier proposition, I think, than in broad strokes than most people think. And part of it is because we can look back at that 19th century and we can see kind of like where all that was headed and what was going on, and you can draw logical conclusions about what's happening. I talk to people all the time, and they're very concerned and worried about the future and what's it going to look like, and and I think we're on the verge of something pretty awesome.
Well, and on that note, let me, again, the story, but for everybody else, reiterate what I mean by inevitability curve, right? And you just said it, right? The ability to predict the future is not that hard. Now, in specific detail, it's almost infinitely hard. However, right, as you think about this, you've seen where we've been, times we've gone through similar things, whatever it is we're talking about, how that worked out. I think what you mostly can do about the future is limit it. You can say, all right, these things are probably completely off the table. And these things are really hard to see how we get there from here. So it leaves this path where all the really likely things are, right?
Right. And the big question is, how violent is it going to be for us to get to that point?
And by every definition of violent, I mean, you and I are infosec folks. We dealt with conflict, for 30 and more years now. We're trying to defend A from B. They have to understand what A and B are doing, who they actually are, what they want, what are the risks. And so it's not typically, it's not kinetic, it is not physical, a conflict and violence. However, they're all part and parcel of the same things. And we've both worked with military infrastructure domestically and internationally and thought through all these things, right? So conflict is standard, right? We're always, and we can take this as far as we like. Individuals, we all have interests and motivations. We want to get through the day. We want to go to bed, not too worried. We want to take care of our interests. And, even when we can work jointly with others, we're compromising, where there's friction. When they get to extremes, when things get kinetic and so forth.
Right. And that's the question I've been considering, right? Is that we've always kind of laid out this, the future is either Star Wars or Star Trek, right? We either create this utopian society or this dystopian society. And I always kind of see Star Wars as a prelude to a Star Trek future, right? They're struggling for getting past that dystopian existence that they have and creating something where there's cohesion and we're kind of at that that beginning right now, right, where it's one or the other. And I think in the Star Trek version where there's a utopian thing where everybody has a place and that's inevitable. I feel like the question is how much are we going to have to go through in order to get to there? So just from an economic perspective, right? Basic universal income makes perfect sense in terms of transitioning from a physical workforce to an automated workforce, and people no longer needing to do certain sorts of things and transitioning to other sorts of activities. The question is how much effort is going to take to get the people who control the capital to agree to give that money to the people. And what's going to have to happen? Are we going to be able to logically convince them that makes the most sense? Are we going to be able to pass laws to make that happen? Or are there going to be an uprising and we're going to just take it? That's the part that's hard to tell, but it's going to happen. We're going to have to move in that direction.
Well, and just taking my own philosophy to that point, I think the revolution rising up and tearing down and rebuilding is hard. And it's expensive and it's unpleasant and it's costly and in every term you can have, right? Which puts it on the banks of what I see as likely futures. It doesn't mean we can't get there. It's just that it's not the preferable for anybody. Everybody loses.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So I don't see large capital transfers. And I'm concerned. As you and I have debated this for a long time. Between the two of us, I'm the right-wing guy this time, because I kind of like capitalism. I like the idea that everybody can work really hard, come up with some crazy idea, better themselves financially, and have more money and do whatever the hell they want with that. But again, within limits, right? It's like the game Monopoly, that you win by getting 100% of the entire money supply, right?
Right.
In the situation we have.
An object lesson in capitalism.
Right. Anybody hasn't taken any economics classes, there's this thing called the money supply. It's how many dollars there are. When people start complaining about printing money, what they're talking about is expanding that money supply. So there's a difference between a world where anybody can get very, very rich and have a lot of money, and a world where anybody can have more and more percentage of all available money. Right. I think that's the kind of problem we have right now. I don't have any problem with people getting silly rich, but when we're really just transferring 30% of all available money from the middle class and people who really need it to people who really don't need it that much, that's where I think we can find some way to have it be a transfer that isn't the rich.
The problem is we transferred a lot of power with it.
Right.
And so that's the question is I think people are much more likely to give up money than they are power, and that becomes the tricky bit.
Well, let me try to dig into that one right now. So as we're talking about in the green room, right? You and I have worked together for a long, long time, messaging for-profit capitalist companies and so forth. And one of the things we've both been arguing for, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's actually good capitalism to be honest and transparent and really, really clear about what you're doing and not doing as a company, right? That I am here to hopefully.
And we've competed against companies that aren't.
Right.
And
and we won.
Yeah,
over
exactly.
and over, right? So Bill and I met in the early firewall days, early 90s. Bill was one of my best, firewall resellers of the Borderware firewall. Talked me into moving to Utah. We went down there. I joined Cisco. You joined me. Ran the firewall business there. Everything's followed along since then. But that opportunity of the late 90s to say, okay, yes, we're a big corporation. Yes, we're a big for-profit corporation called Cisco, right? We're selling almost all of the internet hardware on Earth came from us, and Bill and I were selling the firewalls. And here's I will continue not to mention the name, but you'll remember this. There was a vulnerability found in the fixed firewall, and it was real, and it was bad, and there was an individual researcher that found it. And I talked to that person, and I said, all right, tell you what, give us 10 days so we can get a fix out there, get some protection behind our customers, and I will give you so much credit. You're going to be the most famous person. As much as I have any influence on that, off you go. And that person agreed. And then a day later, they published the vulnerability. And I have not said their name out once since, ever, right? But what you and I and the PIX team did is we went out and put our press release that day. Said, yes, there's a vulnerability, as you've heard. Yes, we're aware of it. We're working like crazy to fix it, and we did. And we took care of people. And I'm sorry for soapboxing on this, but when I left Cisco, started a sim company, and the first VC pitch, Partha and Iman and Phil went through all the slides and had this Silicon Valley investor lean forward and say, that $1 billion Cisco thing, how'd you do that? I said, well, we built a team who would die for each other. We were honest with our customers, with the market, and we took responsibility and built trust. And this Silicon Valley investor leans forward and says, no, really, you can tell me. It's like it's not a trick. And here we are 20-something years later. You are literally, working for a Fortinet, a big, internet company, a big for-profit capitalist company. And your job now, as you described it to me a minute ago, is communicating with the outside world about who Fortinet really is. And I can only imagine when you say that, you mean it. Like, it's just better, faster, cheaper, better capitalism to be honest and transparent.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole gist of it, right? And it's painful sometimes, right? Because there are competitors who aren't interested in behaving that way and pretend they don't have problems and like to point fingers but at the end of the day, our growth rate's pretty impressive because people respond to that sort of a thing. Yeah, have we had problems? Absolutely. Anything with more than 1,000 lines of code, has a problem. And so how do you handle that? How do you manage it? Responsible disclosure is fundamental to being a good citizen, being a good member of the community, and playing a responsible role. And one of the things I've loved about our careers has been that while we've worked for, wildly successful capitalist organizations, at the core, at the heart of it, is still a measure of altruism. The idea of we're trying to help and protect people from a system that is largely, out of control and far more dangerous than I think most people have any real idea. And I love that. I love being in that spot.
Well, let me try to put these threads together. So we, as we're talking about here, you and I have been saying these things for 20, 30 years in exactly those places where, our peers at the time are like, no, kid, you don't understand. This is real business. We can't go telling the truth all the time and everything else. And we've been right. Now we're in this world where SB Mowing, shout out to SB Mowing, that content creator that mows lawns for free, makes a lot of money on the YouTube, so forth. But people get their yards cleaned up, and they do. And it's actually good for them, right? Yep. And this person gets compensated. And I think we've all gone through this, let's say the last 3 years, as all of us, and we'll just pick up people our age, we're getting used to this. We're watching a lot of this stuff. We're saying, okay, is this a scam or is this real? And I don't know I can't even remember his name, right? There's this individual who does this SB Mowing thing. I think they were the first ones to really go viral with that. And there's a couple others now. Good for them. But they're real, right? They're a real person who really is doing this. They have a landscaping company. They thought it would be good for their business, good capitalism, to do good works, actually do good works, and not fake it, because that's high risk. And so just actually go do something nice. Mm-hmm. And it works. And that's just the first example in my head. And there are counterexamples. There's, the giving money to homeless people, right? The channels and content creators. That's a tricky subject. Are you getting rich off of poor people, or are you actually taking your platform to actually help them? We're all, I think, individually and culturally processing that. How do we determine your intent? But if you're doing good works and it's easy to process, because I can't think of how you can be faking this, then you'll do well. You'll do well in a capitalist environment. And I think that points to the future. The shorter term, the next years and decades, I worry about because I can live through those. My kids are going to live through those. But I think we've seen in our little experiment over 3 decades a change from everyone in the business world believing that it's a little rigged, at least, and you got to keep it that way, to over and over again, and now quite often demonstrations in the public space that your best business interests are being honest and being decent, and being moral and being ethical, and not pretending.
Well, there's a really good example. My daughter Heather owns a company called 17 Asset Management that's going. They've gone public. They sell investment opportunities, and basically the whole idea is they've created a series of investment tools that allow organizations that want to invest based on the UN 17 charter things about human development. Is it? And so there's the question is, if I'm going to invest my money, do I invest it in ways that I just don't want to know how you're making that money and how you're, or are we going to try and invest our money in ways that also do good? And the movement shift towards that has been pretty dramatic. There's this huge move towards that. And she had a conversation recently with one of these, billionaire hedge fund managers who said, "I hate everything that you're doing. I hate this." Because at the end of the day, you should just be about how I'm going to make the most amount of money, and there should be no morality involved in it. However, all of my customers want to do this, and so I need to know how you're doing it, right? And so, kicking and screaming, the old guard is coming along, and all the millennials who are in charge of their companies now, they have this vision of, if we're going to make money, we're going to invest our money, let's do good. How do we do this for positive? And so she's in the catbird seat right now because she's at the place where we said, "Oh, let me show you how to do that." And it's really exciting to watch this company explode as this opportunity gets out into the marketplace. And so I think you're right. I think that's. Now, is there a lot of people pushing against it? Absolutely. Politically, what's really ironic to me is that all of the disinformation and the anger and the frustration and the pushing and stuff is coming from the community that had all of the power, which is largely the religious side of things, are the ones who are the most up in arms and the most likely to not be telling the truth or doing the things that are the most above board in terms of those things. But as you said, I'm as a history of that sort of thing. This is not the first time that's happened. When the church becomes the catalyst for resistance to good change, and it's because the power dynamics are shifting.
Well, and the Terry Pratchett, one of my favorite authors, the whole Discworld thing and so forth. He does this a number of times, throughout his books. But it's the awful irony, that doing good things is good for me, right? Just do a selfless act. Just do something that has no benefit for me whatsoever. No, sorry, you can't. And in fact, as we're talking about here, even at the corporate level, if you're honest and transparent, and corporations are made of people. There are human beings in there, and people are generally moral creatures, and we actually will be more productive and therefore more profitable to our company if we're happy, if we're feeling good about what we're doing and whatnot. And again, you can tell me, what's the trick, right? There's no trick, right? In fact, trying to fake sincerity and moral and ethics and so forth takes a lot of work. It's really, really hard. That's called acting. It's a whole, realm of expertise that most of us don't have. Turns out it's just better, faster, cheaper, and therefore more profitable and competitive, making you more productive to be decent people, right? And
the problem is that most of our economic models don't include that. They're based on the notion of self-interest and purely self-interest, and the idea of altruism isn't calculated into the model. And so, but that's real. and it's kind of the flaw in a lot of economic modeling, is that people
Well,
are just going to try and do the right thing for no personal benefit whatsoever.
well, I think, as we get brutally pragmatic about this, going forward, we have to actually build it in. We have to factor it in, and as I think
Well, that's
about
what
it,
Heather's doing in her company, right? They're accounting for that in their whole business model. And that's why it's so
well,
radical.
well, right, but I think one of the things that makes it difficult is we're caught on two sides, because if you're really trying to be moral, ethical, and so on and so forth, you don't want to think about your self-interest. You just want to do things, but your self-interest is there, and it always is.
Oh, yeah, that it never goes away.
So I think on that side of the equation, making it okay to be comfortable with saying what your self-interest is, and saying,
Mm-hmm.
well, in the security community, this is a huge issue. If you're part of a working group, in some standards organization or whatever, and you're seen as too self-promoting, it's over, right? Your ability to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve is gone.
Oh yeah, that's a delicate balance that I spend a lot of time on in my current position, is this finding the spot between saying, hey, we've got a really good solution and we can really, really help you, without over patting ourselves on the back, right? And over self promotion is a death knell. And we've seen that. You and I both seen that, where companies come in and they go like, we're the best thing since sliced bread, and we're going to change it. And they go, yeah, and they go away. I mean,
But again,
but I like what you said about being honest about what your self interest is. That no one's. I think very few people carry an illusion that self interest isn't a powerful driver in the things that we do, and so. But being honest, articulating that doesn't really upset people like you might think it does. My self interest is, we want to make a whole lot of money doing this, and we want to empower our employees, and we want to be able to let people go on vacations and buy their own homes and do all the things that we want to be able to do. But at the end of the day, our top priority is this other. I mean, we're all coin operated, but being open about that is part of that responsible disclosure process.
well, I think you know that's a good place to end the conversation as possible, because I think that is the future. I think that's the inevitable mean-free path. And it's the center of the likely probabilities is that it ends up being much more and more and more, and continues to be profitable, personally and corporate and capitalistically and morally and ethically, to be really transparent about why we're doing things, right? And then it's okay to have self-interest, and as long as you're clear on what they are, right, and you're not trying to fool anybody, and then it comes down to our behavior. It's like, but personally, or as an organization, if you want to then go out of the market and working groups or whatnot and say, these are my self-interest, and to pursue them, I'm going to call you all stupid and say I'm smarter and take all the oxygen. Give it a shot. I don't think it'll work.
Yeah, he ended up, we've just seen recently, over and over again, and it's even in the technology space, you end up in jail.
Yeah, consequences to actions. Who would have thought? So I know the two of us can go on forever, but
oh right, yeah, I was like, we're just getting rolling.
Right, but our time is not. Right. So with that, any last thoughts you have? Do you think we're going to a positive future, or
well, I think that the last thing I wanted to say is that most of the stuff that we're dealing with is neither good nor bad, right? I get asked all the time, people are afraid of like AI. It's going to be scary, or it's going to, and AI is neither good nor bad. Its potential for misuse is high. But at the end of the day, we'll only put up with that for so long. And I think that's the answer. Is the short term, can you make a lot of money scamming a lot of people using AI? And sure, absolutely. But is that a long-term strategy? Is that a reliable strategy? Is that no? That's just, we won't put up with it. And humans have a tendency to not want to put up with that. And I think that's kind of the positive thing that drives me, my optimistic outlook for the future is we eventually will just not stand for it.
right. We drive back towards the center, right? As I tried to describe this whole inevitability curve concept, the best I can say about the bumpers, the sides of the likely future is it's full of a lot of we don't want it. And folks just don't like, we don't, and it's not a specific thing. Is as we get closer and closer and more often in spaces where there's just, we can't tell what's going on. The disinformation world today, right? This is not a partisan issue, right? You and I both have plenty of friends on all sides of this, political spectrums. Everybody's sick of it. Nobody wants to live in a world where we really can't tell what's real or not. So the driver to go back to the center, is building on that side. Nothing's driving us farther in that direction as far as large demographics and social tendencies, right? Where the tension is pushing us away from that.
I think so. And there are individuals who clearly want to continue to create confusion because you can create a power base out of that, right? You can, but it doesn't last. Those things don't last. I think we're seeing a trajectory already where our fear about certain shifts in our culture, they've reached kind of their zenith. I think we've gotten to a point where I think people are pretty sick of this chaos.
Thisness, right?
Yeah.
All right. With that, thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for coming along for another wild ride. We will see you again.
Thank you.